Settle into a comfortable position. Let the concerns of your day begin to fade. Tonight, we journey back 5 centuries to a world that operated by rhythms and rules vastly different from our own. Imagine yourself transported to the Valley of Mexico in the early 16th century, to a time when the great city of Tenochtitlan rose from the waters of Lake Texcoco, its white temples gleaming in the sun. The Aztec Empire stretched across much of Mesoamerica, a vast web of tribute and obligation connecting hundreds of communities to this island capital. You will spend time tonight as an ordinary person in this world, someone who felt the weight of empire not through grand political decisions, but through the labor of your hands and the sweat of your brow. You will witness the collision of 2 worlds that changed history forever. You will explore the sacred mysteries encoded in stone and ritual, and you will glimpse, however briefly, the splendor that existed at the very apex of Aztec power. The history we explore tonight is not always gentle. It contains hardship, violence, and loss. But from the safe distance of centuries, we can observe these realities with calm curiosity, understanding them as part of the human story, while appreciating the comfort and security of our present moment. Let the past unfold slowly. There is no need to hold on to every detail. Allow the rhythm of these ancient lives to wash over you, steady and unhurried. Picture yourself waking before dawn in a small house with walls of adobe, the earthen floor beneath your woven mat still holding the coolness of night. Beyond your doorway, the settlement is beginning to stir. You belong to a Calpulli, a community of families bound together by kinship, shared land, and collective obligation. Your Calpulli exists in a city-state that, a generation ago, resisted Aztec expansion. That resistance failed. Now you live as subjects of the Triple Alliance, and everything about your daily existence is shaped by that subordination. The morning air carries the scent of wood smoke as your neighbors kindle their cooking fires. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks. The rhythm of grinding stone against stone begins, the endless work of preparing maize, the foundation of every meal, every day. You rise not to the luxury of contemplating the day ahead, but to the immediate demands of labor that cannot be postponed. Your obligations are measured, recorded, and enforced with meticulous attention. The tribute demanded by Tenochtitlan arrives in your community as a ledger of requirements: bundles of cotton cloth, quantities of maize and beans, cacao beans, chili peppers, measures of honey, turkey feathers, jaguar pelts, lengths of rope, ceramic vessels. Some tribute is paid in goods, some is paid in labor, and some, though you try not to think of it, is paid in people. The Calpulli's communal lands stretch before you as you join others heading to the fields. These are not lush, abundant plots. The soil must be coaxed and managed, nourished with human waste and lake mud, carefully irrigated from canals. The sun rises steadily, and with it comes heat that builds throughout the morning, pressing down on your shoulders as you bend to your work. Imagine the repetitive motion of your labor. If you are tending maize, you move between plants, checking for pests, ensuring the irrigation channels carry water evenly, pulling weeds that would otherwise choke the crops. The soil dries quickly under the sun, and your hands grow rough from constant contact with earth and stone. If instead you work the chinampas, the extraordinary raised garden beds built in the shallow lake waters, you pole your canoe through narrow channels, moving between rectangular plots bursting with squash, beans, amaranth, tomatoes, and flowers. The chinampas represent one of the most ingenious agricultural innovations in the world, allowing the Valley of Mexico to support a population density that seems impossible given the available land. But innovation does not mean ease. You construct these floating gardens by weaving reeds and stakes into rectangular frames, dredging mud from the lake bottom, to build up the planting surface, anchoring everything with willow trees whose roots hold the structure stable. Maintenance is constant. The edges must be reinforced, new soil must be added, the canals must be kept clear. Every harvest brings the calculation: how much can we keep and how much must we send to Tenochtitlan? The tribute collectors arrive with their painted books, their ametal paper marked with glyphs that record your community's obligations. They count with precision that allows no argument, the specified amount of maize measured in standardized units, the required number of cotton mantles, each woven to particular dimensions, the jaguar pelts or tropical bird feathers acquired through trade with distant regions. Adding another layer of burden, you must obtain goods you cannot produce locally, which means engaging in commerce that drains your community's resources. Failure to meet tribute quotas brings consequences that hang over your community like an approaching storm. The Macahuali, the common people, occupy the lowest tier of a rigidly stratified society. Below you lies only enslavement. The threat is not abstract. Communities unable to fulfill their obligations see members selected for debt servitude. A family might sell a son or daughter for a period of years, trading personal freedom for the collective survival of the Calpulli. And beneath even that possibility lies the specter of sacrifice. The Aztecs believed the gods require human blood to sustain the cosmos, to keep the sun moving through the sky, to ensure the continued existence of the world itself. Many sacrificial victims come from warfare, from the Xochiaoyotl, the Flower Wars, fought partly to capture prisoners. But tribute can include people, and some of those selected never return from Tenochtitlan. Consider the weight of this existence. You wake each day knowing that your labor serves not only your family and your Calpulli, but the distant capital where nobles you will never meet consume the products of your work. The cloth you weave may wrap the shoulders of a warrior who guards the emperor. The maize you grow may feed craftsmen who create art you will never see. Your toil radiates outward, supporting an empire that demonstrates its power through your subordination. The social hierarchy surrounds you with constant reminders of your position. When a noble passes through your community, you lower your eyes. You do not speak unless addressed. If you travel to Tenochtitlan, perhaps to deliver tribute, perhaps conscripted for a construction project, you witness splendor and abundance that exist in sharp contrast to your own circumstances. The temples rise impossibly high, their surfaces bright with paint and carved stone. The marketplaces overflow with goods from every corner of the empire and beyond. Noble houses spread behind walls that shield lives of comfort you can barely imagine. Yet within your own sphere, life follows its patterns. The Calpulli provides structure and identity. You know every family in your community, every child, every elder. Marriages are arranged with consideration for strengthening community bonds. Religious festivals break the monotony of labor, bringing music, ritual dances, communal feasts, where pulque, the fermented maguey juice, flows more freely than usual, softening the hard edges of daily existence. Your attire speaks immediately of your status. As a meticulously, you wear simple garments, a maxlatl loincloth for men, perhaps a tilma cloak if the weather requires it, a huipil blouse and quetal skirt for women. The cloth is maguey fiber or basic cotton, undyed or colored with simple natural dyes. Nobles wear cotton extensively, dyed in brilliant colors, decorated with featherwork and precious stones. They wear elaborate headdresses and gold jewelry. The sumptuary laws are not mere custom. They are enforced restrictions that make visible the social order through clothing itself. Food follows similar patterns of distinction. Your diet centers on maize in its many forms. Tortillas cooked on a comal griddle, tamales steamed in leaves, atole gruel drunk in the morning. You eat beans and squash, amaranth, chia seeds, tomatoes and chili peppers that add flavor to otherwise plain fare. Meat is rare. Perhaps turkey on festival days, or small game if you are fortunate. Dogs are bred for eating, though you consume this protein infrequently. The nobles feast on venison, wild boar, quail, turkey, fish from the lakes. They drink chocolate, that precious beverage prepared with vanilla and spices. You taste cacao only through the few beans you might save from tribute requirements, crushed and mixed with water into a bitter drink, nothing like the rich chocolate of the elite. The work continues day after day. If you weave, your hands move through patterns learned in childhood, your fingers threading cotton through the backstrap loom, anchored to a tree or post, tension maintained by a strap around your lower back. Hour after hour, the cloth grows, each hand width of fabric representing a small victory over the tribute requirement. Your shoulders ache from the posture. Your fingers develop calluses at precise points where they grip and pull the threads. If you work in pottery, you shape clay without a wheel, building vessels with coils spiraled upward, smoothed into seamless forms, decorated with slips and burnished surfaces before firing. If you work in featherwork, one of the highest crafts, though you work at its lowest levels, you prepare and sort feathers, tie them in bundles, assist master craftsmen who create the magnificent banners, shields, and cloaks that adorn nobles and deities. Some community members are called away for construction projects. The empire's appetite for monumental building seems endless. Tenochtitlan expands constantly. New temples rise atop older structures. Causeways must be maintained, canals dredged, aqueducts repaired. The labor draft pulls men from the Calpulli for weeks or months at a time. You haul stone and timbers. You help construct the raised beds in the swampy ground surrounding the city. You dig and build under the supervision of engineers and architects who plan with sophisticated understanding of hydraulics and load-bearing design. The work is exhausting. Stone is heavy. The sun is relentless. The supervisors push for progress, and behind their authority stands the power of the empire, ready to punish those who lag or resist. When you return to your Calpulli, your body remembers the labor through aches that persist for days. Warfare presents another dimension of obligation. The empire requires warriors, and while the noble class provides professional soldiers who form the core of Aztec military might, commoners are also called to service. If you are a young man, you train in the skills of combat, the use of the maquahuitl, that fearsome wooden club edged with razor-sharp obsidian blades, the spear thrower called an atlatl that launches projectiles with devastating force, the sling and bow. You learn formations and tactics. When campaigns are called, you march with others from your Calpulli, joining the columns that flow toward whatever city-state has rebelled or whatever new territory is being brought under Aztec control. Battle is chaotic and terrifying. The goal is not primarily to kill, but to capture. Prisoners are valuable for sacrifice, for slave labor, for ransom. Yet death comes nonetheless. Warriors fall to obsidian blades, to spear thrusts, to stones slung with terrible accuracy. The battlefield becomes a confusion of color and sound, the bright featherwork of standards, the painted shields, the war cries and horns, the screams of the wounded. If you survive and capture a prisoner, your status may rise slightly. A successful warrior gains recognition, receives better clothing, earns the right to wear specific insignia. But most Machahuali who fight will never achieve the 4 captures necessary to become a true warrior of rank. You fight because you are commanded to fight. You hope to survive. You hope to return to your Calpulli intact. The gods permeate everything. Your understanding of the cosmos is one of continuous exchange. Human beings must nourish the gods so that the gods will sustain the world. Rain must fall for crops to grow. The sun must rise each day. These are not guaranteed continuities, but miracles that require maintenance through ritual and sacrifice. You participate in festivals throughout the year, each dedicated to specific deities in the complex Aztec pantheon. Tlaloc, the rain god, receives offerings during the dry season when every community anxiously watches the sky for clouds. Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war god, patron of the Aztecs, demands blood to continue his daily battle against darkness. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, represents wisdom and the breath of life. Dozens of other deities govern aspects of existence: agriculture, commerce, childbirth, death, mountains, water, maize itself. Your local temple is modest compared to the great pyramid temples of Tenochtitlan, but it serves as the spiritual heart of your Calpulli. You attend ceremonies where priests chant in ritual language you only partly understand, where incense of copal resin fills the air with fragrant smoke, where offerings of flowers, food, and paper are made to secure divine favor. The priests, with their blackened robes and hair matted with the blood of auto-sacrifice, cutting their own flesh to offer blood to the gods, represent a bridge between human and divine realms. Night falls, and you return to your house. The day's labor settles into your muscles as fatigue. Your evening meal is simple, eaten while sitting on the floor. Conversation with family members ranging across the small concerns of community life. The health of relatives, plans for the next planting, worries about the coming tribute collection. Your house is dim, lit only by the flickering light of the hearth fire or perhaps a small oil lamp. The walls absorb the day's heat and release it slowly through the evening. You sleep on a woven mat, perhaps with a thin blanket if the season requires it. The sounds of the settlement fade gradually. The last conversations, the dogs settling, the rustle of wind through maize stalks, the distant sounds from the lake, the call of waterfowl, the gentle lap of water against the chinampas. Tomorrow will bring more of the same. The rhythm of tribute labor continues week after week, season after season, year after year. You live within a system that demands your production, your service, your obedience. The empire extracts its requirements with mechanical precision, and your life is shaped by that extraction. Yet you persist. The Calpulli endures. Children are born and named in ceremonies that connect them to the calendar and the gods. Couples marry and form new households. Elders pass on knowledge of crafts, agriculture, ritual, and tradition. Life under the weight of tribute is difficult, often harsh, sometimes dangerous. But it is also ordinary in its way, filled with the same fundamental human experiences that transcend time and place. The bonds of family, the satisfaction of skilled work, the comfort of familiar surroundings, the hope that the next harvest will be better, that your children might have slightly easier lives, that the gods will look favorably upon your offerings and grant your community continued survival. The tribute system that defines your existence is neither ancient nor eternal, though it might feel that way. The Aztec Empire rose to dominance only a century before your time. Tenochtitlan was founded in 1325, and the Triple Alliance that transformed it into an imperial capital coalesced in the 1420s. The rapid expansion that brought your city-state under Aztec control occurred within living memory. Elderly members of your Calpulli remember a time before tribute, before Aztec soldiers arrived, before your community's autonomy ended. But power, once established, can seem permanent. The Aztecs control the valley. Their armies are formidable. Their capital is magnificent. Their administrative systems are sophisticated. To imagine a world without Aztec dominance requires envisioning an impossibility. Yet even now, as you sleep on your mat, the threads of that impossibility are already in motion. Far to the east, across waters your people call the Divine Sea, events are unfolding that will shatter the empire that shapes your every waking hour. Ships you cannot imagine are crossing an ocean you have never seen, carrying men whose arrival will transform everything. But that transformation lies ahead. For now, in this particular night centuries ago, you are simply tired, simply human, simply trying to fulfill obligations that feel overwhelming but inescapable. The empire requires your labor, and you give it. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin again. The tribute must be met. The gods must be served. Life continues under the weight of Aztec power, steady and unchanging, or so it seems in this moment before everything changes forever. We shift now from the daily rhythms of tribute labor to a larger transformation, one that unfolded over 3 years and changed the course of history for millions of people. The events we explore in this segment moved slowly at first, then accelerated with devastating momentum. Allow yourself to observe these moments from a distance, understanding them as part of the vast sweep of human experience. The year is 1519. Along the eastern coast of what the Aztecs call their world, reports begin arriving in Tenochtitlan of strange occurrences. Fishermen and coastal traders speak of enormous structures moving across the water, floating houses, some say, or mountains that drift. These structures carry beings unlike any seen before, men with pale skin, bearded faces, bodies covered in metal that glimmers in the sunlight. They ride atop enormous deer-like creatures that shake the earth with their footfalls. These reports travel along the tribute networks, passing from one community to another, growing more elaborate and confused with each retelling. In Tenochtitlan, Emperor Moctezuma II receives these accounts with deep unease. The timing seems significant. According to the Aztec calendar, this is the year 1 Reed, associated with Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god who, according to some traditions, sailed away long ago toward the east and promised to return. Could these strangers be divine emissaries? Could they be Quetzalcoatl himself returning, or are they something else entirely? Perhaps envoys from a distant empire unknown to the Aztecs. Moctezuma consults his advisors, his priests, his soothsayers. He sends gifts toward the coast, elaborate featherwork, jade ornaments, gold worked into ritual objects. These are not mere presents, but probing offerings, attempts to understand the nature of these visitors through their responses. The Spanish expedition, led by Hernán Cortés, has arrived with specific intentions. Cortés commands roughly 500 soldiers, a small cannon, a handful of horses, and mastiffs bred for war. They have sailed from Cuba without the governor's authorization, driven by rumors of wealthy kingdoms on the mainland, and by Cortés's own ambition to secure personal glory and fortune before his rivals can act. Cortés establishes contact with coastal peoples, particularly the Totonacs, who live under Aztec dominance and chafe at their tributary obligations. Through a woman named Malintzin, called Malinche by the Spanish, and later La Malinche by history, who speaks both Nahuatl and Mayan, and through Jerónimo de Aguilar, a Spanish castaway who learned Mayan during years of captivity, Cortés begins to understand the political landscape he has entered. What he learns reveals opportunity. The Aztec Empire, for all its apparent strength, rests on a foundation of conquest and coerced tribute. Many subject peoples resent Tenochtitlan's dominance. The Tlaxcalans, who have maintained their independence through decades of conflict with the Aztecs, might become allies. Cholula, a major city on the route to the Valley of Mexico, has complex relationships with both Tlaxcala and Tenochtitlan. Cortés begins his march inland, moving through territories where the reactions to his small army vary dramatically. Some communities view the Spanish with suspicion or hostility. Others see potential allies against Aztec power. In Tlaxcala, after initial battles that demonstrate the devastating effectiveness of Spanish steel, horses, and cannons against warriors armed with obsidian-edged weapons, the Tlaxcalans choose alliance. This decision will prove momentous. Thousands of Tlaxcalan warriors will eventually join the Spanish cause, providing the numerical strength that Cortés's small expedition lacks. Imagine Moctezuma in Tenochtitlan, receiving increasingly detailed reports of this foreign force advancing toward his capital. The Spanish have been victorious in every military engagement. Their weapons produce thunder and smoke that kills at a distance. Their horses, animals entirely unknown in the Americas, charge with terrifying speed and power. The metal armor they wear turns away obsidian blades that would slice through cotton armor. Yet Moctezuma does not immediately mobilize his full military strength to destroy this threat. His response is more complex, shaped by the web of divine interpretation, political calculation, and perhaps a fateful hesitation. He sends more embassies, bearing gifts of ever greater value. He tries intimidation, declaring the difficulties of the mountain passes. He considers options, weighs prophecies, consults advisors who offer conflicting counsel. In November 1519, Cortés and his expedition, accompanied by thousands of Tlaxcalan allies, arrive at the shores of Lake Texcoco and gaze upon Tenochtitlan for the first time. The Spanish accounts describe their astonishment. The city rises from the water like a dream, white temples gleaming, causeways stretching across the lake, canoes countless as stars dotting the water's surface. The population, perhaps 200,000 people in the island city, more in the surrounding settlements, makes Tenochtitlan larger than any city in Spain. Moctezuma makes a decision that will haunt the remaining days of his life. He invites the Spanish into the city as guests. Perhaps he still hopes to understand and control them. Perhaps he believes that keeping them close serves diplomatic purposes. Perhaps he is constrained by cultural expectations about hospitality and divine visitors. The sources, Spanish accounts and later indigenous histories, offer multiple possible motivations, none entirely satisfactory. Cortés and his men enter Tenochtitlan, cross the Great Causeway, pass beneath the aqueduct carrying fresh water from Chapultepec, enter a city whose size and sophistication exceed anything they have previously encountered. They are housed in the palace complex, given quarters appropriate to important visitors, shown the markets, the temples, the accumulated wealth of empire. The Spanish marvel at what they see, but also recoil from aspects of Aztec religion. The temples are adorned with human skulls. Blood stains the altars where sacrifices occur. The contrast between architectural magnificence and ritual practices they find abhorrent creates cognitive dissonance that shapes their subsequent actions. For months, an uneasy coexistence develops. The Spanish are guests, yet they are also potential threats. Cortés, with characteristic boldness, places Moctezuma under a form of house arrest. Not quite imprisonment, but the emperor's movements are controlled, his authority circumscribed by Spanish presence. Moctezuma continues to govern, but increasingly he does so under Spanish influence. This strange arrangement might have continued indefinitely, but events intervene. In spring 1520, a Spanish expedition sent from Cuba to arrest Cortés arrives at the coast. Cortés must leave Tenochtitlan with most of his men to confront this new force. He leaves behind Pedro de Alvarado, commanding a garrison of about 80 Spanish soldiers and a few hundred Tlaxcalan allies. In May 1520, during the festival of Toxcatl, when Aztec nobles and warriors gather in the ceremonial precinct for ritual dances honoring Huitzilopochtli, Alvarado makes a decision whose motivations remain disputed. Perhaps he fears an uprising. Perhaps he seeks to seize gold and treasure worn by the dancers. Perhaps the violence is premeditated intimidation. Whatever the reason, Spanish soldiers seal the exits to the ceremonial courtyard and attack the unarmed participants. The massacre is swift and brutal. Warriors and nobles who came to dance, adorned in featherwork and jewelry, their minds focused on ritual rather than combat, fall to Spanish steel. The sources, particularly the indigenous accounts compiled later, describe the horror in terms that convey trauma. The courtyard running with blood, the confusion, the desperate attempts to escape, the methodical killing. When Cortés returns to Tenochtitlan days later, having defeated the Spanish force sent against him and recruited most of those soldiers to his own command, he finds a city transformed. The Toxcatl massacre has shattered whatever fragile accommodation existed. The people of Tenochtitlan, are in open revolt. The Spanish garrison is under siege in their quarters, desperately defending against attacks that press from all sides. Moctezuma, hoping to calm his people, appears before them and calls for peace. The response is devastating. Stones and arrows fly toward their emperor, symbols of repudiation and rage. Moctezuma is struck, wounded by his own subjects. He dies days later. Whether from these wounds or by Spanish hands remains historically uncertain. The situation becomes untenable. The Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies are trapped in a city that has turned against them with unified fury. Food and water run low. Casualties mount. The Aztecs destroy sections of the causeways, making retreat difficult. Cortés decides to attempt escape under cover of darkness. The Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows, unfolds on July 1st, 1520. The Spanish and Tlaxcalans attempt to leave Tenochtitlan, carrying portable bridges to cross the gaps in the causeways. Burdened with gold and treasure, they refuse to abandon. But the escape is discovered. Aztec warriors swarm from canoes and from the city itself, attacking the fleeing column in darkness and rain. The causeway becomes a scene of chaos. Warriors clash in the narrow space where retreat is impossible and combat confused. Men fall into the water, many drowning from the weight of the gold they carry or from the wounds they have received. Horses stumble and go down. The portable bridges break or become jammed. By dawn, when survivors stagger away from the lake, Spanish losses are catastrophic. Perhaps half of Cortés's Spanish soldiers dead. Thousands of Tlaxcalan allies killed, most of the cannons and firearms lost. The Spanish survivors retreat to Tlaxcala, wounded and demoralized. Cortés famously weeps beneath a tree, grieving his losses. It seems the invasion has failed. Tenochtitlan stands triumphant, having expelled the foreign threat. But another force was already at work, invisible and far more devastating than any army. Among the Spanish soldiers and among the people of the coast who had contact with Europeans, smallpox had begun to spread. This disease, unknown in the Americas before 1492, found populations with no immunity, no prior exposure, no biological defenses. The epidemic that swept through central Mexico in late 1520 killed with horrifying efficiency. The fever, the characteristic pustules, the secondary infections. Mortality rates were staggering, perhaps killing half of those infected, possibly more. Entire families died. Villages were depopulated. In Tenochtitlan, the disease struck nobles and commoners alike, killing without distinction. Among the dead was Cuitlahuac, who had succeeded Moctezuma as Tlatoani, emperor, and who had led the resistance that drove out the Spanish. He ruled only 80 days before succumbing to smallpox. The disease accomplished what Spanish arms could not, weakening the Aztec capacity to resist what was coming. Cortés, meanwhile, recovered his strength in Tlaxcala. He recruited more indigenous allies, attracted by Spanish victories and by their own grievances against Aztec dominance. He had ships built in Tlaxcala, carried in pieces over the mountains, and launched on Lake Texcoco 13 brigantines that would give the Spanish control of the water that had been Tenochtitlan's greatest defensive advantage. By spring 1521, the siege of Tenochtitlan began in earnest. The Spanish and their allies, now numbering in the tens of thousands, with Tlaxcalans forming the vast majority of the besieging force, sealed off the causeways, cut the aqueducts supplying fresh water, and prevented food from entering the city. The brigantines patrolled the lake, sinking the canoes that had carried supplies and cutting Tenochtitlan's connections to the surrounding communities. Inside the city, Cuauhtémoc, the young Tlatoani who succeeded Cuitlahuac, organized desperate resistance. Aztec warriors continued to fight with extraordinary courage, defending their city street by street, house by house. They dug canals deeper to slow Spanish advances. They destroyed bridges. They launched night raids against the besiegers' camps. They refused offers of negotiation. But the mathematics of siege warfare were implacable. Food supplies dwindled. The city's population, still enormous despite the smallpox deaths, faced starvation. Fresh water became precious. The rainy season brought some relief, but also misery. Disease spread more easily, and the Spanish and their allies maintained their positions despite the discomfort. The Spanish assault advanced methodically. Rather than risk ambush in the city's streets and canals, Cortés ordered buildings demolished as his forces advanced, filling canals with rubble, creating clear lines of sight and movement. The strategy was effective but destructive. The magnificent city that had awed the Spanish on their first entry was being systematically destroyed. Fighting continued through the summer of 1521, increasingly brutal as desperation grew on both sides. The Aztec defenders had no illusions about what defeat would mean. The Spanish and their allies, having committed everything to this campaign, could not afford to fail. The casualty counts on both sides mounted steadily. In August, after more than 90 days of siege, with Tenochtitlan's population reduced by disease, starvation, and continuous combat, with much of the city in ruins, Cuauhtémoc attempted to flee by canoe. He was captured by Spanish brigantines on the lake. The last Tlatoani of an independent Aztec empire was brought before Cortés, and with his capture, organized resistance collapsed. The aftermath was devastating. The Spanish and their allies sacked what remained of Tenochtitlan. Years of accumulated tribute, gold, jade, featherwork, textiles, were looted or destroyed. The survivors faced subjugation, forced labor, and the introduction of diseases that would continue to ravage indigenous populations for decades. The demographic catastrophe that began with smallpox in 1520 continued through waves of measles, typhus, and other European diseases, eventually reducing Mexico's indigenous population by perhaps 90% over the course of the 16th century. The physical city was largely destroyed. The Spanish would build Mexico City atop its ruins, using the stones of Aztec temples to construct Christian churches, imposing a new architectural vocabulary over the foundations of the old capital. The causeways remained, but now they connected a colonial city to the mainland rather than serving an island empire. The indigenous perspective on these events survives in documents like the Florentine Codex, compiled in Nahuatl by Bernardino de Sahagún with indigenous informants, and in other accounts that record memories of the conquest from Aztec viewpoints. These sources convey not only the military events, but the psychological trauma of defeat, the struggle to understand why their gods seemed to abandon them, the grief over losses that seemed incomprehensible in scope. They remember Moctezuma's hesitation, his gifts to the strangers, his confinement. They remember the Tenochtitlan massacre with particular bitterness, the violation of sacred space, the killing of unarmed ceremonial participants. They remember the siege, the hunger, the stench of unburied dead, the desperate hope that somehow relief would come, that the gods would intervene, that the impossible tide could be turned. They remember Cuauhtémoc's courage, his refusal to surrender even when the cause became hopeless. Spanish sources claim that Cortés tortured Cuauhtémoc after the surrender, burning his feet to extract information about hidden treasure. Whether this occurred exactly as described, it became part of the narrative. The young emperor who endured pain without revealing secrets, who maintained dignity in defeat. The role of indigenous allies in the Spanish victory cannot be overstated. Cortés commanded hundreds of Spanish soldiers. His indigenous allies numbered in the tens of thousands. Tlaxcalans, Totonacs, warriors from other city-states who saw opportunity in Aztec defeat. These forces provided the numerical strength that made the siege possible and sustained it through months of grinding attrition. Their motivations were complex. Some sought revenge for tributary demands and military defeats. Some hoped to supplant the Aztecs as regional powers. Some calculated that alliance with the Spanish offered better prospects than resistance. In the immediate aftermath, some Allied communities received privileges from the Spanish crown, though these would erode over time as colonial administration consolidated. The Spanish weapons, steel swords, crossbows, harquebuses, cannons, horses, provided tactical advantages that proved decisive in open battle. But technology alone does not explain Spanish success. Superior logistics, the willingness to demolish Tenochtitlan rather than capture it intact, the aggressive recruitment of local allies, the ruthless exploitation of political divisions within the Aztec Empire, and especially the devastating impact of epidemic disease all contributed to an outcome that, at the beginning of 1519, would have seemed impossible. Consider the dramatic reversal of fortune. In mid-1520, Cortés's expedition was defeated, expelled from Tenochtitlan with massive casualties. A year later, Tenochtitlan lay in ruins, and the Aztec Empire had effectively ceased to exist. The transformation from indigenous imperial capital to Spanish colonial city occurred with stunning rapidity. The conquest of Tenochtitlan did not immediately end indigenous resistance throughout Mexico. Some regions remained independent for years or decades. Some communities negotiated favorable terms of submission. Others fought Spanish expansion until overwhelming force subdued them. But the fall of the Aztec capital represented a psychological and practical breaking point. If Tenochtitlan, magnificent, powerful, seemingly invulnerable, could fall, what chance did lesser powers have? The tragedy extended far beyond the immediate combat deaths. The tribute system that had structured the lives of millions dissolved, but it was replaced not by freedom, but by new forms of exploitation. The encomienda system granted Spanish conquistadors the right to extract labor and tribute from indigenous communities. The repartimiento system continued forced labor under different administrative arrangements. The Spanish Empire proved no less demanding than the Aztec Empire, and in many ways more destructive, as it combined economic extraction with cultural suppression and religious conversion. The year 1521 marks a dividing line in history, the collision point of two worlds that had developed independently for millennia. After that collision, nothing would be the same. The Valley of Mexico, the broader region of Mesoamerica, and eventually the entire hemisphere were transformed by encounters that began with Cortés's landing on the coast and climaxed with Cuauhtémoc's capture in August 1521. From the comfortable distance of centuries, we can observe these events without the immediate terror they carried for participants. We can see patterns of human behavior, ambition, courage, treachery, resilience, cruelty, calculation, playing out on a vast stage. We can note the contingencies. If Moctezuma had acted more decisively, if disease had not arrived when it did, if the Tlaxcalans had not allied with the Spanish, the outcome might have been different. But history unfolded as it did, shaped by the decisions of individuals and the larger forces of disease, technology, and geopolitics. The Aztec Empire that had dominated central Mexico for less than a century collapsed in 3 years. The city that rose from Lake Texcoco, with its white temples and broad causeways, its markets and gardens and palaces, was destroyed and rebuilt as something fundamentally different. The memories persisted, though. Indigenous peoples preserved stories of what was lost, what was taken, what was endured. Those memories, transmitted through generations, form part of Mexico's complex historical identity. The recognition that the nation stands atop layers of history, that conquest and survival, destruction and continuity are all woven together in the national story. As this segment draws toward its close, consider the fundamental human dimensions of these events. People who woke on ordinary mornings found their world transformed by forces beyond their control or understanding. Soldiers who marched expecting victory fell in confusion and darkness. Families who had lived in Tenochtitlan for generations watched their city burn. The steady rhythms of empire, tribute, and cosmological order that had seemed permanent shattered in the space of a few brutal years. Let that recognition settle gently. History contains these ruptures, these moments when everything changes, but it also contains continuity, people continuing to live, to adapt, to preserve what they can of their identities and cultures, even under the most oppressive circumstances. We move now toward other dimensions of Aztec civilization, exploring mysteries encoded in stone and ritual, seeking to understand the symbolic systems that gave meaning to the world we have been observing. We turn now from warfare and conquest to explore something older, more enigmatic, more deeply woven into the fabric of Mesoamerican civilization. Long before the Aztecs built their empire, long before Tenochtitlan rose from the lake, people across Mexico and Central America played a game with a rubber ball in specially constructed courts. This game persisted for over 3,000 years, evolving in form and meaning, but maintaining a central place in religious, political, and social life. Imagine standing at the edge of such a ball court. Not the grand court at Tenochtitlan, though we will visit that in time, but an older court, perhaps among the Maya in the Classic period, or further back among the Olmecs who developed the game in its earliest known forms. The court itself is an architectural statement, a carefully designed space that transforms athletic competition into something that transcends sport. The classic ball court takes the shape of a capital letter I when viewed from above. Two parallel structures built of stone slope inward at precise angles, creating playing surfaces that rise from a flat central alley. The dimensions vary. Some courts span only 20 meters in length, intimate spaces for small groups. Others stretch nearly 100 meters, vast arenas that could accommodate hundreds of spectators on the sloping sides and the surrounding platforms. The stone surfaces are smooth, worked carefully to provide consistent playing characteristics. In many courts, a central marker, often circular, carved with intricate glyphs and images, rests in the exact middle of the playing alley. Additional markers may occupy the ends of the court, and in some later versions, particularly among the Maya, stone rings project from the side walls high above the playing surface, circular targets carved with serpents or other sacred imagery. The ball itself represents a technological innovation that Europeans, when they first encountered it, found remarkable. The rubber comes from latex, harvested from trees native to Mesoamerican lowlands, processed through techniques that allow it to be formed into solid, bouncing spheres. The balls vary in size and weight depending on regional traditions and the specific context of play. Some are relatively small and light, others massive and heavy, requiring considerable strength to keep in motion. The rules, as we understand them from archaeological evidence, from later Spanish descriptions, and from the surviving ball game traditions among some indigenous communities, emphasize keeping the ball in play using specific parts of the body while prohibiting the use of hands and feet. Players strike the ball primarily with their hips, though knees, elbows, and heads are also permitted depending on regional variations. Picture the protective gear the players wear. Heavy padding wraps around the hips and torso, thick cotton armor, sometimes reinforced with wood or leather, designed to absorb the impact of the solid rubber ball striking at high velocity. The repeated impacts leave bruises, can break ribs, cause internal injuries. This is not a gentle recreation. Even with protection, the physical demands are extreme and injuries are common. A match unfolds with players. The number varies, perhaps 2 against 2, or teams of up to 7 players per side, moving along the court, striking the ball with explosive bursts of energy, attempting to send it past their opponents, to hit specific markers, or in courts with rings, to perform the extraordinarily difficult feat of sending the ball through the narrow stone circle mounted high on the wall. Archaeological evidence and ethno-historic accounts suggest multiple ways to score points or win. Hitting specific markers, keeping the ball in play longer than opponents, forcing errors, These all contribute to victory. The game combines elements we might associate with tennis, volleyball, and racquetball, but played with the body rather than implements, on a court whose sloping sides add geometric complexity to every angle and ricochet. But to understand the ball game only as athletic competition misses its deeper significance. For the peoples of Mesoamerica, the court represents a portal between worlds, a liminal space where the boundaries between human and divine, life and death, order and chaos become permeable. The most famous mythological narrative associated with the ball game comes from the Popol Vuh, the sacred text of the Quiche Maya. In this creation story, the hero twins, Hunahpu and Ixbalanque, are summoned to the underworld realm of Xibalba to play the ball game against the death gods who rule there. The twins' father and uncle had been similarly summoned years before and were defeated, sacrificed by the lords of Xibalba. The hero twins accept the challenge, descending into the underworld and facing a series of trials in the dark houses of Xibalba. The House of Cold, the House of Jaguars, the House of Fire, the House of Bats. Through cleverness and supernatural abilities, they survive these ordeals. Finally, they face the death gods on the ball court. The game the twins play is more than sport. It is cosmic battle. The rubber ball represents the sun moving through the sky, or the severed head of their father, or life itself bouncing between existence and extinction. The court becomes the passage between worlds, the place where the living can confront death and, if skillful and fortunate, emerge victorious. The hero twins ultimately triumph through trickery and transformation, allowing themselves to be sacrificed and then resurrecting, demonstrating power over death itself. They ascend from Xibalba and are transformed into celestial bodies, the sun and moon, or Venus, depending on interpretation. Their father's head becomes the maize god, symbolizing agricultural renewal and the cycle of planting, death, and rebirth that sustains human life. This myth, recorded in the colonial period but drawing on much older traditions, provides a framework for understanding the ball game's religious dimensions. Every match on an earthly court echoes the cosmic struggle. Players become temporary avatars of the hero twins. The game enacts fundamental cosmological principles about the relationship between life and death, light and darkness, order and chaos. The Aztecs inherited and adapted these ancient traditions. At Tenochtitlan, the great ball court, the Tlachtli, stood adjacent to the main temple complex, a physical proximity that emphasized the game's sacred character. Spectators gathered on the platforms overlooking the court when important matches were played, matches that might be scheduled to coincide with religious festivals or to mark political events. The Aztec understanding of the ball game incorporated it into their broader cosmology, particularly their concept of the ongoing struggle to maintain cosmic order. Just as the sun god Huitzilopochtli fights nightly against the forces of darkness, just as human sacrifice nourishes the gods and sustains the world, the ball game represents another arena where fundamental cosmic dramas play out in ritualized form. Evidence from Aztec art and from archaeological contexts associated with ball courts suggests connections to human sacrifice that have fascinated and troubled scholars for generations. Some ball court reliefs depict decapitation scenes. Stone carvings show players or perhaps captives with severed heads. The relationship between ball game and sacrifice appears in multiple contexts. Did the losing team face sacrifice? Were captive warriors forced to play against their captors before execution? Were some matches specifically designed as ritual prelude to sacrificial killing? The evidence does not yield simple answers. Different regions, different time periods, different specific contexts may have followed different practices. What seems clear is that at least some ball games, particularly those associated with major religious festivals or political events, concluded with ritual killing. The connection makes symbolic sense within Mesoamerican religious frameworks. The court as threshold between worlds, the game as cosmic battle, death as necessary offering to maintain universal order. The defeated player, or the sacrificial captive, transitions from earthly existence to service of the gods, from the bull court threshold to the divine realm. For the Aztecs, the bull game also served political functions. Matches could be diplomatic events, bringing together leaders from different city-states for ritualized competition that demonstrated athletic prowess, honored the gods, and provided opportunities for negotiation and alliance building. A well-played match brought prestige to a city, to a leader, to the patron who sponsored the event. Gambling accompanied many games. Spectators wagered goods, sometimes staking substantial wealth on the outcome. The Spanish chroniclers expressed shock at the amounts that changed hands, the willingness of Aztec nobles to risk slaves, land, even personal freedom on the results of the game. This gambling reflected deeper cultural attitudes about fate, divine favor, and the fundamental uncertainty of existence, themes the ball game embodied. Archaeological investigation of ball courts reveals layers of ritual activity beyond the games themselves. Offerings placed beneath markers or in the corners of courts, precious objects, human remains, ceremonial items sanctified the space. The act of construction itself was ritualized, with foundation deposits marking the transformation of ordinary ground into sacred arena. The iconography carved into ball court architecture and depicted on ceramic vessels and in codices shows players in elaborate costumes, balls decorated with skulls or glyphs, supernatural figures observing matches, scenes that blend realistic depictions of gameplay with mythological narrative. Decoding these images provides insight into how the Aztecs and their predecessors understood the game's significance. One recurring motif shows the ball game as microcosm of agricultural cycles. The ball represents the sun, or more specifically, the sun's daily journey from emergence to descent to rebirth. The sloping sides of the court mirror the mountains on the horizon, where sun rises and sets. The central alley is the passage through which celestial bodies move. When players successfully keep the ball in motion, they participate in sustaining cosmic order, ensuring the sun will continue its cycle, that life will persist. Another interpretive layer links the ball game to warfare. Captive warriors were sometimes forced to play before sacrifice, their defeat on the court preceding their death on the altar. The game becomes a stylized reenactment of military defeat, a demonstration of the captor's power, a ritual preparation for the transition from warrior to divine offering. The equipment worn by ball players, the heavy padding, the sometimes elaborate helmets, resembles military protection, and elite warriors were often accomplished ball players as well. The gendered dimensions of the ball game merit consideration. Most evidence suggests players were male, particularly in competitive contexts. But some imagery shows female participants, and the game's symbolic associations with fertility, with life-death rebirth cycles, with maize cultivation, all domains where female deities held important positions in the Aztec pantheon, suggest the game's meanings extended beyond purely masculine martial values. The technical skill required to play well meant training began in childhood for those who would compete seriously. Young men practiced in neighborhood courts, developing the hip-striking technique that allows controlled, powerful contact with the ball. They built the core strength and leg power necessary to maintain the explosive, repeated movements the game demands. They learned to read angles, to anticipate ricochets off the sloping walls, to coordinate with teammates. For truly skilled players, the ball game offered a path to status and recognition that transcended ordinary social hierarchy. A commoner who excelled might attract noble patronage. Successful players received gifts, honors, privileged positions. The game created a meritocratic space within an otherwise rigidly stratified society. Ability on the court mattered more than birth. though of course nobles also played, and their superior resources allowed for more extensive training. The rubber ball's journey from forest to court involved its own networks of trade and tribute. Rubber-producing regions in lowland areas sent latex as tribute to highland centers. Specialized craftsmen processed the latex, adding juice from morning glory vines to create the chemical reactions that vulcanized the rubber, giving it the elasticity and durability required. Different regions developed slightly different processing techniques, creating balls with varying characteristics. Some more bouncy, some more solid, variations that affected gameplay and carried regional identities. The courts themselves varied architecturally across Mesoamerica, reflecting local traditions and available materials. Maya courts often featured ornate stone rings and elaborate sculptural programs. Aztec courts tended towards somewhat simpler decoration, but careful proportions. Some regions built smaller, more intimate courts for everyday play. Others constructed massive ceremonial courts designed to accommodate thousands of spectators for major events. When the Spanish arrived and witnessed ball games, their descriptions mixed admiration for the players' skill with horror at the ritual contexts. They marveled at the rubber ball. Europeans had never seen rubber before and were impressed by the athletic prowess displayed. But the connections to sacrifice, to gambling, to religious practices the Spanish viewed as pagan led to efforts to suppress the game in the colonial period. Yet the ball game persisted in modified forms in some indigenous communities, disconnected from its ritual meanings but maintaining the basic athletic activity. In modern times, a version called ulama survives in a few locations in western Mexico, played by people who continue traditions their ancestors maintained through centuries of colonial suppression and cultural change. Watching contemporary ulama provides glimpses, however distant, of what the ancient game looked like in motion. The archaeological study of ball courts continues to reveal new information. Excavations uncover offering deposits, analyze court construction techniques, identify patterns of use and renovation. Some courts show evidence of multiple construction phases, suggesting they remained important over extended periods. Others were built, used briefly and abandoned, perhaps marking particular historical moments or short-lived settlements. Chemical analysis of court surfaces sometimes reveals residues, blood from sacrifices, latex from balls, evidence of the offerings and rituals that sanctified these spaces. Skeletal remains found in association with courts provide data about players' bodies, the specific injuries they sustained, the musculoskeletal adaptations that developed from repeated striking of the ball, evidence of the physical toll the game exacted. The ball game's 3,000-year persistence across diverse Mesoamerican cultures testifies to something profound about its meanings and functions. It provided entertainment, certainly, the excitement of athletic competition, the drama of close matches, the satisfaction of skilled play. It created social occasions for gathering, for gambling, for celebration. It offered opportunities for political theater and diplomatic interaction. But beyond these practical functions, the ball game addressed fundamental human concerns about order and chaos, life and death, fate and agency. By ritualizing these concerns in a physically demanding, rule-bound game played in architecturally distinct sacred space, Mesoamerican peoples created a way to engage with cosmological questions that had no simple answers. The game made abstract theological concepts tangible and experiential. Consider the player in the moment of striking the ball, feeling the impact through layers of protective padding, watching the ball arc through the air toward the opposing court. In that moment, physical skill, mental calculation, and ritual meaning converge. The player is simultaneously athlete, religious participant, and representative of cosmic forces. The ball is simultaneously rubber object, sun symbol, and embodiment of life itself. This layering of meanings, this ability to hold multiple interpretations in productive tension, characterizes much of Mesoamerican religious and artistic expression. The ball game exemplifies how everyday activities, in this case, a game with a bouncing ball, could be elevated through architectural framing, ritual elaboration, and mythological association into something that connected human beings with the most fundamental questions of existence. As this segment draws toward its close, reflect on the fact that while the Aztec Empire lasted less than a century, while Tenochtitlan stood for less than 200 years, the ball game tradition spanned 3 millennia. It predated the Aztecs by thousands of years and outlasted them in modified forms. This temporal depth suggests the game addressed needs and meanings that transcended any particular political formation or cultural moment. The courts that remain, scattered across Mexico and Central America, ranging from humble platforms to magnificent stone structures, stand as monuments to this enduring tradition. They are less famous than temples or palaces, less immediately legible to modern viewers, but they represent spaces where communities gathered for centuries to watch games that were simultaneously sport, ritual, political event, and cosmic drama. The mysteries remain. We cannot fully reconstruct the rules from archaeological evidence. We cannot know exactly what participants felt during ritual games. We cannot perfectly translate the symbolic systems that gave the game meaning. But the persistent effort to understand these mysteries honors the people who played, who watched, who built the courts and carved the imagery and passed the traditions from generation to generation across vast spans of time. Let these reflections settle gently as we prepare to shift perspective once more, moving from the ball court to the palace, from athletic ritual to imperial splendor, from the mysteries encoded in stone to the elaborate hierarchies of Aztec political power at its zenith. We arrive now at the pinnacle of Aztec power and wealth, stepping through the gates of Moctezuma II's palace complex in Tenochtitlan. Here, at the heart of the empire, luxury and administration intertwine, creating spaces that dazzle the senses while serving as the machinery of governance. Allow yourself to wander through these halls slowly, observing the accumulated splendor of tribute and conquest, the careful hierarchies that structure every interaction, the beauty created through the labor of thousands. The palace complex, more accurately, several interconnected palaces, occupies an enormous area adjacent to the sacred precinct where the great temples rise. Spanish accounts describe structures so vast that they housed hundreds of rooms across multiple stories and courtyards. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, one of Cortez's soldiers, claimed he walked until exhausted and still had not seen all the palace chambers. Imagine approaching the main entrance. The walls rise smooth and white, finished with stucco that gleams in the sunlight. The doorways are broad, designed to allow multiple people to pass simultaneously, framed with carved stone lintels depicting symbols of imperial power. Guards stand at attention, warriors selected for this prestigious duty, their cotton armor pristine, their obsidian-bladed weapons polished, their bearing reflecting the discipline expected of those who protect the emperor. Beyond the entrance, the palace unfolds as a maze of interconnected spaces, each designed for specific purposes within the complex machinery of empire. Ground floor rooms house administrative functions, scribes working with painted codices, recording tribute receipts, tracking military obligations, noting legal judgments. These bureaucrats, members of the noble class, trained from youth in the specialized knowledge required for imperial governance, sit on woven mats, their painted books spread before them, their writing instruments ready to add new glyphs to the endless accounts. The tribute warehouses occupy substantial portions of the palace complex. Room after room stores the wealth extracted from subject peoples, piles of cotton cloth folded into standardized bundles, each representing days of labor by tributary weavers, ceramic jars containing cacao beans, functioning as currency, as well as luxury drink, sealed containers of honey and chili peppers, bundles of dried herbs for medicine and ritual, exotic feathers sorted by type and color, brilliant scarlet from tropical birds, iridescent green from quetzals, the long-tailed plumes that mark the highest ranks of nobility. Walk slowly through these storage rooms, observing the material manifestation of empire. Every item represents a community's labor, a quota fulfilled, the exercise of power across vast distances. The tribute system's efficiency becomes visible here in the careful organization. The labeled containers, the palace officials who can locate specific items from specific regions, who know exactly what arrived yesterday and what is expected tomorrow. Adjacent to the storerooms, workshops hum with controlled activity. Master craftsmen create objects for imperial use and diplomatic gift-giving. Feather workers, practitioners of one of the most prestigious crafts, construct elaborate pieces using techniques requiring years to master. They work with tiny feathers attached to cotton backing, creating images of gods, warriors, or abstract patterns through careful arrangement of different colors. A single shield or banner might incorporate thousands of individual feathers, each tied in place with specialized knots, the overall effect creating luminous surfaces that shimmer with movement. Goldsmiths work in separate chambers, heating metal in small furnaces, using lost wax casting techniques to create intricate jewelry, ritual objects, and ornaments. The gold arrives as tribute from regions where rivers carry nuggets or where mines yield ore. The smiths are not working their own possessions, but imperial resources, creating under commission their finest works destined for the emperor's personal use or as diplomatic gifts that project Aztec power. Lapidaries grind and polish jade, turquoise, obsidian and rock crystal into beads, pendants, masks, and ritual objects. The sound of stone against stone provides constant background rhythm. The work requires patience. Shaping hard stone with primitive tools takes hours for small pieces, weeks for complex carvings. Apprentices learn by watching masters, gradually acquiring the ability to see the finished object within the raw material, to understand grain and fracture patterns, to achieve the polished surfaces that make jade glow with inner light. The residential sections of the palace rise in multi-story structures around interior courtyards. Moctezuma's private apartments occupy the most secure, most elevated portions, accessible only to immediate family, personal servants, and a few trusted advisors. These chambers contain luxuries that concentrate the empire's wealth. Cotton cushions stuffed with feathers for sitting and sleeping, woven mats dyed in colors achieved through expensive dyes, carved wooden furniture inlaid with jade and shell, ceramic vessels painted with elaborate scenes. The emperor's wardrobe fills entire rooms. Cotton mantles in every color, some worked with intricate embroidery, depicting gods and sacred symbols, others featuring featherwork of extraordinary complexity. Headdresses that rise like fountains of plumes, each feather carefully selected and attached. Jade ear spools, gold lip plugs, turquoise mosaics that ornament ritual objects. Sandals decorated with precious materials. Even the emperor's footwear proclaims status and wealth. Bathing facilities reflect the Aztec emphasis on cleanliness and ritual purification. Moctezuma bathes multiple times daily, attended by servants who heat water, prepare herbal infusions, provide fresh cotton towels. The Temazcal, a sweat bath house, stands in a private courtyard, its interior dark and steamy, a place for both physical cleansing and spiritual purification. Steam rises from water poured over heated stones, herbal scents fill the air, and the heat draws sweat from the skin, the whole experience both pleasurable and ritually significant. The throne room, the chamber where Moctezuma receives ambassadors, hears petitions, delivers judgments, is designed to overwhelm with imperial presence. The emperor sits elevated on a throne covered with jaguar pelts and cushions, a canopy of precious feathers extending above him. Those granted audience approach with prescribed gestures of respect. eyes lowered, sprinkling earth toward the emperor, speaking in formal language that acknowledges the cosmic significance of his position. The protocol surrounding these audiences is elaborate. Petitioners might wait days for an audience, camping in outer courtyards, observing strict behavioral codes while on palace grounds. When finally summoned, they perform rituals of abasement, not from servility, but from recognition of the emperor's role as intermediary between human and divine realms. To address Moctezuma is to approach a semi-divine presence whose decisions carry religious as well as political weight. Court hierarchy structures every interaction. Nobles of different ranks occupy specific positions relative to the emperor. The highest ranking, members of the royal family, military commanders, provincial governors, high priests, stand closest. Lesser nobles arrange themselves by rank extending outward. Commoners rarely enter these spaces, and when they do, they occupy the most peripheral positions, barely glimpsing the emperor himself. The elaborate meals served in the palace represent culinary art elevated to extraordinary heights. Spanish chroniclers describe feasts where hundreds of dishes were prepared, offering Moctezuma virtually limitless choice. Picture the kitchen complexes where this food originates. Vast rooms with multiple hearths, storage areas for ingredients, preparation surfaces where cooks work with ingredients arriving fresh daily from the markets or from tribute deliveries. The menu draws from the empire's ecological diversity. Lake fish arrive live in canoes, kept fresh in water-filled vessels. Waterfowl, ducks and geese come from the chinampas where they nest among the crops. Turkey, domesticated throughout Mesoamerica, provides the most common meat for elite consumption. Deer and wild boar arrive from hunting expeditions in forested regions. Rabbits, quail and other small game supplement the protein sources. The variety of maize preparations alone could occupy entire meals. Tortillas of different thickness and fineness. Tamales stuffed with beans, chili peppers or small amounts of meat, wrapped in maize leaves or banana leaves and steamed until tender. Atole gruel, flavored with honey, vanilla, cacao, or chili peppers. Maize dough formed into shapes and fried or baked. Chocolate prepared for the emperor reaches heights of sophistication impossible for commoners. Cacao beans are roasted, ground on metates, grinding stones, mixed with water, vanilla, and sometimes chili peppers or other spices, then frothed vigorously to create foam. The resulting beverage is served in painted ceramic cups, sometimes on fine ceramic vessels reserved exclusively for imperial use. Moctezuma reportedly consumed dozens of cups daily, appreciating the subtle variations in flavor from different cacao sources and preparation methods. The dishes themselves become part of the display. Pottery painted with elaborate designs, gourds carved and decorated, and most remarkably, vessels of gold and silver, metals so precious that using them for everyday dining, though no day in the emperor's life is truly every day, demonstrates wealth beyond measure. After meals, these gold and silver vessels are sometimes given away as gifts, rather than being reused, the discarding of valuable objects itself a statement of imperial abundance. Servants attend the emperor during meals, keeping discreet distance while remaining ready to respond to any request. Moctezuma eats behind screens that shield him from direct observation. His consumption of food is too intimate an act for general viewing. After eating, he smokes tobacco from elaborately carved pipes, the smoke believed to have purifying and medicinal properties. The menagerie and aviaries represent perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of the palace complex. Moctezuma maintains a collection of animals that serves multiple purposes, demonstrating imperial reach across diverse ecosystems, providing subjects for observation and study, displaying wealth through the resources required to maintain such collections, and supplying feathers and other materials for craft production. The aviaries house hundreds of birds representing species from every corner of the empire and beyond. brilliant scarlet macaws from lowland forests, quetzals with their impossibly long iridescent tail feathers, so precious that killing these birds is prohibited. Feathers must be harvested from live birds and allowed to regrow. Parrots and parakeets fill chambers with their calls. Waterfowl from the local lakes swim in artificial pools. Eagles and hawks, apex predators kept in separate enclosures, receive daily rations of meat. Servants attend the aviaries constantly, cleaning enclosures, providing fresh food and water, monitoring the birds' health. Some birds are molting, shedding feathers that are carefully collected for craft use. Others are breeding, their eggs and chicks receiving protective attention. The feather workers maintain close relationships with the aviary keepers, selecting specific birds whose feathers meet their current needs, waiting for natural molt rather than harming the birds. The mammal collection occupies separate areas. Jaguars pace in sturdy enclosures, their spotted pelts rippling with muscle, their presence evoking the power and danger of the tropical forests they come from. Pumas and ocelots, smaller but equally magnificent, occupy neighboring spaces. These great cats receive regular meals. Deer, rabbits, turkeys sacrificed to feed the imperial menagerie. Wolves and coyotes, representing different aspects of the wild, live in their own enclosures. Deer graze in garden areas, semi-domesticated, their antlers and hides harvested when they die naturally. Dogs of various breeds, some companions, some destined for consumption, occupy kennel areas. Even more exotic creatures appear in Spanish accounts, animals they described as serpents, but which may have been crocodiles or caimans from coastal regions. The care required for this menagerie is substantial. Animals must be fed appropriate diets, enclosures must be cleaned regularly, medical attention must be provided for injuries or illnesses. The tributary network supplies this need. Communities located near specific animal habitats provide live specimens as part of their tribute obligations. Professional hunters capture jaguars and eagles. Coastal peoples send crocodiles. The entire empire contributes to Moctezuma's collection. Gardens spread throughout the palace complex, providing beauty, food, medicinal plants and ritual flowers. Ornamental gardens feature plants arranged for aesthetic effect, flowering species blooming in succession throughout the year, creating continuous displays of color and fragrance. Water features, fountains, pools, channels provide sound and visual interest while also serving practical irrigation purposes. Medicinal gardens grow herbs and plants used in traditional healing practices. The Aztecs possess sophisticated pharmacological knowledge, understanding which plants treat specific ailments, how to prepare infusions and poultices, proper dosages and combinations. Palace physicians maintain these gardens as living pharmacies, consulting them when preparing treatments for the imperial family or high-ranking nobles. The most precious gardens cultivate flowers for ritual purposes. Certain flowers appear in religious ceremonies, adorning altars and sacred spaces, being offered to deities or worn by celebrants. The cultivation of these ritual flowers becomes itself a sacred activity, conducted with attention to appropriate seasonal timing and ceremonial protocol. Moctezuma walks in these gardens for relaxation and contemplation. Paths wind among plantings, offering views of water features, providing seats carved from stone where the emperor can rest and observe. The gardens create microclimates, shaded areas for cool respite during heat, sunny spots that gather warmth on cooler days. The design balances aesthetic beauty with practical function, pleasure with productivity. The administrative heart of the palace operates continuously. Tribute records must be maintained with absolute accuracy. Military deployments must be coordinated. Legal disputes require adjudication. Provincial governors send regular reports that must be read, evaluated, and answered. The machinery of empire generates endless paperwork, or rather endless painted codices, glyphic records that document everything from tribute quotas to genealogies to astronomical observations. Senior administrators, members of the noble class who have demonstrated competence and loyalty, manage this information flow. They supervise teams of scribes, interpret reports from provincial officials, draft responses to petitions, maintain the elaborate records that allow centralized governance of millions of people spread across hundreds of communities. Without writing as Europeans understood it, the Aztecs nonetheless maintained comprehensive bureaucratic systems through pictographic and glyphic records that trained readers can interpret with precision. The council chambers, where major decisions are made, occupy prominent spaces. Moctezuma does not rule as absolute autocrat. He consults with advisors, particularly the 4 highest-ranking nobles who form an inner council. These men represent different aspects of imperial governance: military affairs, religious matters, tribute administration, judicial functions. Their advice carries weight, though final authority rests with the emperor. Maps painted on cotton or metal paper cover tables in strategic planning rooms. These maps show tribute districts, mark rival powers, indicate resources and transportation routes. Military campaigns are planned using these documents. Tribute obligations are calculated, diplomatic strategies are developed. The maps represent sophisticated geographic knowledge accumulated through generations of exploration and conquest. At night, the palace transforms. Torches light the corridors and courtyards, their flickering flames creating moving shadows. Guards patrol continuously. The emperor's security is paramount, and the palace houses treasures that require constant vigilance. In residential quarters, noble families gather for evening meals and conversation. In the administrative sections, some work continues. Certain records must be updated daily. Certain rituals occur at specific times, regardless of sun or darkness. Moctezuma himself follows elaborate evening protocols. Religious observances mark sunset, acknowledging the sun's descent into the underworld and praying for its return at dawn. Personal servants attend to the emperor's needs, preparing sleeping quarters, providing food if desired, maintaining the fires that warm rooms during cooler months. The emperor retires, surrounded by luxury, but also by the weight of responsibility. The empire's welfare rests substantially on his decisions. His diplomatic skill, his military judgment, his ability to maintain the favor of the gods. Consider the totality of this palace complex as a physical manifestation of empire. Every room serves a function in the exercise of power, storing tribute, creating luxury objects, housing administrators, feeding thousands, displaying wealth, conducting rituals, maintaining animals, growing plants. The whole complex operates as an integrated system where resources flow inward from tributary regions and decisions flow outward to provincial centers. The human cost underlying this splendor remains visible to those who look carefully. The tribute warehouses are filled through the labor of thousands who grow, weave, mine, hunt, and craft according to imperial demand. The animals in the menagerie were captured at risk by hunters. The gold and silver were extracted from mines by workers who saw none of the luxury their labor supported. The palace itself was built by conscripted laborers, hauling stone and timber, shaping materials, working under supervision until this monument to imperial power stood complete. Yet for those who lived and worked within the palace, for the nobles who enjoyed its luxuries, for Moctezuma himself at the center of this web of wealth and power, the palace represented the natural order of things, the proper expression of imperial dignity, the appropriate setting for governance, the visible proof of Aztec supremacy. The emperor at the heart of this splendor occupied a position believed to be divinely sanctioned, his power derived from the gods themselves, his person semi-sacred, his palace an earthly echo of celestial order. The Spanish, when they first entered this palace complex as guests in 1519, experienced reactions mixing awe and avarice. The luxury impressed them. Some descriptions compare the palace favorably to European royal residences. But they also calculated the wealth in terms of gold and silver, evaluated the tribute system as potential colonial revenue, considered how this magnificent structure might be repurposed for Spanish control. Within 18 months, their presence as guests would transform into occupation, and the palace that symbolized Aztec imperial power would become the center of Spanish colonial administration. The treasuries would be looted, the menagerie would be dispersed or destroyed, the gardens would be neglected, the elaborate hierarchies would collapse. But in the years before that transformation, the palace stood at the zenith of its glory, the beating heart of an empire that seemed to those within it permanent and unassailable. As we conclude our time within these palace walls, reflect on the human capacity to create beauty and order, to accumulate knowledge and wealth, to construct systems of governance that coordinate the activities of millions. The Aztecs built an empire remarkable for its administrative sophistication, its artistic achievements, its architectural ambition. The palace complex represented all of this, the apex of Mesoamerican civilization in the early 16th century. But empires, however magnificent, are not eternal. Power, however overwhelming it appears to those subject to it, can shift with surprising rapidity. The palace that seemed the permanent center of the world in 1519 was ruins by 1521, its stones repurposed, its treasures scattered, its hierarchies dissolved. History contains this lesson repeatedly. Nothing built by human hands lasts forever unchanged. Our journey through Aztec history draws now to its gentle close. We have walked paths both ordinary and extraordinary, from the labor of tribute workers to the collapse of empire, from ancient ritual games to imperial splendor. We have witnessed hardship and beauty, violence and creativity, the relentless demands of power and the persistent human efforts to find meaning within systems not of their own choosing. The distance of 5 centuries allows us to observe these events and experiences with calm curiosity. The tribute workers' exhaustion, the warriors' fear, the palace splendor, the ball players' skill, all have faded into history, leaving us with stories and lessons rather than immediate dangers. Consider how profoundly different that world was from our own. You live in a time when empire is differently expressed, when labor obligations follow different patterns, when religious life rarely demands human sacrifice, when the foods you eat and clothes you wear come through supply chains that connect you to distant strangers without threat of military enforcement. The continuities exist. Human beings still navigate hierarchies, still work to meet obligations, still seek meaning in ritual and tradition, but the specific forms have transformed beyond recognition. From the safety of your present moment, with the comfort of your bed, the security of your surroundings, the freedom from tributary demands and sacrificial threats, you can appreciate the resilience of people who lived in harsher circumstances. The commoner who rose before dawn to tend the chinampas, the warrior who faced obsidian blades in combat, the craftsperson who created beauty from basic materials, all demonstrated human capacities for endurance, skill, and adaptation. The Aztec Empire rose rapidly and fell completely, but the people persisted. Indigenous communities in Mexico today maintain cultural connections to their Aztec ancestors, preserving language, traditions, and memories that survived conquest and colonization. History is not only about empires rising and falling, but also about ordinary people continuing through whatever transformations occur around them. Let these reflections settle into your mind gently. There is no need to hold on to every detail, no test to pass, no obligation to remember specific dates or names. The stories we have explored tonight served their purpose if they occupied your thoughts, provided interesting material for contemplation, and allowed your mind to wander through times and places far removed from your immediate concerns. The past exists now only as memory, as stories told and retold, as archaeological traces interpreted by scholars, as cultural legacies transmitted through generations. We cannot change what happened. We can only seek to understand, to acknowledge the full complexity of human experience across time, to recognize both the differences and similarities between our world and those that came before. As sleep approaches, or as your thoughts drift into that peaceful state between waking and sleeping, allow the images from tonight's journey to fade naturally. The tribute worker returns to their mat. The ball court grows quiet. The palace lights dim. The lake that once held Tenochtitlan reflects only moonlight. The city that rose from its waters long since transformed into something different. You are safe. You are comfortable. You are separated by centuries from the struggles and splendors we have observed. History asks nothing of you except perhaps curiosity, perhaps reflection on how people in different circumstances lived their lives with the same fundamental humanity you possess. Rest now. Let the rhythm of breathing slow naturally. Let the concerns of your day fade into insignificance. Let the past remain past, interesting to visit, but distant, unable to disturb your present peace. The Aztecs believed the sun required human effort to rise each day. We know better now. The sun will rise tomorrow without sacrifice, without ritual, through the impersonal mechanics of planetary rotation. You need do nothing to ensure it. You need only rest, allowing your body and mind the recovery they require. Sleep well, knowing that the struggles of history have given way to the present moment, that you occupy a time and place where the particular hardships of Aztec commoners do not touch you, where empires rise and fall through different mechanisms, where the morning will bring its own concerns, but none that require rising before dawn to work communal fields under tribute obligations. The past recedes. The present holds you gently. Tomorrow awaits, but for now, there is only the comfort of rest, the peace of letting go, the simple blessing of a safe place to sleep undisturbed by the demands of distant emperors or the requirements of gods who no longer command belief. Good night.